On this Sunday night, a deepening crisis in Canada's largest city. Refugees trying to find a better life are forced to live on the streets.
We're actually compounding that trauma every minute that we leave people out here.
The battle between governments over help. A new tragedy on the front lines of Canada's wildfire fight as a heat dome suffocates a wide swath of the U.S.
We're also having really high sea temperatures.
The race to regulate artificial intelligence, the potential threats, solutions, and warnings about protecting humanity. And Canadian women get ready to kick off the World Cup.
I'm definitely excited.
The dispute distracting from the beautiful game.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. There are millions of people around the world right now who are thinking of Canada with dreams of a better life. But for some refugees in Canada's biggest city, the reality has been very different than what they expected. They're here, but homeless. So just steps from trendy Toronto restaurants and shops, a makeshift sidewalk shelter has been created, and it's now ballooning in size. Tonight, there are calls for governments of all levels to take action. Political leaders have been caught in a stalemate over who's responsible and who's to blame for a situation that's being called a crisis. Ahmar Khan has our top story.
Day by day, the refugee encampment site in Toronto's downtown continues to grow. Refugees who fled persecution in a variety of African countries to find shelter and safety in Canada have been without both.
They're already coming from places where they're fleeing trauma. And so we're actually compounding that trauma every minute that we leave people out here.
Since the beginning of June, when the City of Toronto decided to refer refugees to federal programs instead of municipal shelters, saying they were at capacity, the situation has turned more dire. What started off as a few has become dozens, with nearly 50 people now on the streets.
They're always there. We're now just seeing them in one particular location because they know that they can receive some kind of support if they're here.
And support has certainly been plentiful. Thanks to efforts made by Diana Chan McNally and community advocates, they've raised over $50,000 and have food, water, and even tents for some respite. But missing in action is a response from the government.
What we need is shelter, and I believe that the Canadian government can do that, and they are capable of providing shelter for us.
Instead of shelters, temporary or permanent, refugees have been sleeping on the streets, getting soaked by the rain.
Oh my goodness.
Some saying they stay awake throughout the night, standing still, thinking about their reality.
Ever since we're here, sleeping in the rain, most times whenever it rains, the rain will rain on us. So it's really terrible.
As for government officials, they are at odds over cost. The city says it has yet to receive more than $100 million in federal funding to cover shelter costs for refugees, but will also need staff and shelter space. But a spokesperson for Immigration Minister Sean Fraser says that housing asylum seekers is the responsibilities of provinces and municipalities. Chan McNally says it's not uncommon for her to see vulnerable people used as pawns between governments.
We're seeing a stalemate. They don't see this as a blight on our nation, as a blight on all of us as a country.
The different levels of government are expected to meet on Tuesday to continue to work towards a solution.
Hopefully the federal government will actually support the City of Toronto and other municipalities with the funding they promised but did not commit.
Ahmar Khan, Global News, Toronto.
One more person has died in last month's bus crash west of Winnipeg. Manitoba RCMP confirm a 79-year-old woman who had been in the hospital since the collision died from her injuries today. On June 15th, a semi struck a bus carrying seniors on the Trans-Canada Highway. A group was on a day trip to a casino. In total, 17 people died in the crash. And a gondola crash in Quebec has left one person dead and another person in critical condition. It happened in the resort town of Mont-Tremblant, about 90 minutes northwest of Montreal. Quebec police say that a piece of construction equipment hit the gondola, knocking two people riding inside to the ground. The resort canceled the rest of a music festival that was supposed to end today. An intense heat wave continues to swelter large swaths of the United States, with temperature records forecast to be broken from coast to coast. Scorching temperatures are fueling wildfires in California. Excessive heat warnings and advisories are in place from the Pacific Northwest all the way to Florida. As Jamie Mauracher explains, it's not just the land that's getting hotter.
Just what the doctor ordered.
The prescription? Water and lots of it, as tourists brave Death Valley, California, simmering to reach record highs.
For over 100 years, we didn't hit it. And then in 2020, we got 130. In 2021, we got 130. And then we might hit it again this weekend.
54 degrees Celsius is somewhat expected when we're talking about one of the hottest places on Earth. But this heat dome is blanketing a large portion of southwestern U.S., including parts of Texas, which are under a heat advisory today. Here in Houston, the high could reach 44 degrees. Extreme temperatures that are pounding down on California, Nevada, Arizona, and even Florida.
In addition to having extremely high temperatures on land, we're also having really high sea temperatures. And so some of our long-term monitoring sites here off of Miami are starting to show signs of early coral bleaching.
And these reefs rarely recover, decimating entire ecosystems if they die.
It's not only in Florida. Something like 40% of the planet is seeing a marine heat wave right now.
In Canada, heat warnings are stretching into the Northwest Territories, and weeks of warmth have fueled wildfires. A similar site in Spain where thousands have had to evacuate. Potentially record-breaking extreme temperatures have also damaged agriculture and left tourists scurrying for shade.
If it continues the trend now, I think we're all in for a big shock.
But it shouldn't come as one. Globally, scientists have been sounding the alarm for decades.
Thank you so much.
Barring action, this is our new normal. Jamie Mauracher, Global News, Houston.
In the Northeast U.S., millions are bracing for more intense rainfall and flooding today. Tornado watches and warnings are also in effect for much of the region, including New York and Massachusetts. Flash flooding killed 4 people in Pennsylvania on Saturday. 3 others are still unaccounted for, including a 2-year-old girl and her 9-month-old brother. More than 1,000 flights in and out of the Northeast have been canceled because of the weather. Here at home, another firefighter has been killed on the front lines of the wildfire fight, this time in the Northwest Territories. Officials say the victim was from Fort Leard and died while battling a nearby blaze on Saturday afternoon. Now, this comes 2 days after 19-year-old Devin Gale died while fighting a wildfire near Revelstoke, BC. About 380 fires are burning across the province, 76 of which have prompted evacuation orders and alerts. Wildfire smoke continues to blanket northern and central BC and most of Alberta, plummeting the air quality in both provinces. Smoke is also moving into the Northwest Territories and southwestern Saskatchewan, and as a result, special air quality statements are in effect for much of Western Canada, with Environment Canada warning the smoke could linger for at least the next 48 hours. Extreme weather is also causing chaos in parts of Asia, with at least 37 deaths linked to flooding and landslides in South Korea. Officials say at least 9 bodies were recovered from this flooded tunnel in the city of Chengdu. People are said to have been trapped in their cars after floodwater caused by days of torrential rain poured into the underpass. Several people are still missing across the country, with thousands being forced to leave their homes due to the heavy rain. The South Korean military has been called in to help with the rescue efforts. That deal allowing Ukraine to export its grain products through the Black Sea is about to expire, and Russia's war is showing no signs of ending anytime soon. Now Ukrainian forces have their hands on cluster munitions, those controversial weapons many countries, including Canada, have banned. Redmond Shannon looks at how Russia's president is responding.
The TQ Samson bulk carrier leaves the Ukrainian port of Odessa carrying rapeseed and corn in what could be the last grain shipment from the port under the current Black Sea Grain Initiative. The deal was first brokered by Turkey and the United Nations a year ago to safely allow the export of Ukrainian grain products during the war, particularly to poorer countries, although almost half has been shipped to rich nations. The grain deal was twice extended by Russia this year, but now expires on Monday. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he hopes efforts with the UN will convince Russia to keep the corridor open. The Kremlin says President Vladimir Putin is waiting on a commitment to remove sanctions against the export of Russian foods, even though Russian grain exports have risen sharply since the 2022 invasion of Ukraine.
He will use whatever is available to him, whether it is military, political, or economic, to extort Ukraine, to extort the West.
Inland on the front lines, the battles rage as Ukraine makes slow gains in its counter-offensive. It has now controversially received US cluster munitions, banned by many countries, including Canada. In a newly released segment from an interview with Russian state TV, Putin said Russia has plenty of its own cluster munitions. He claimed Russia has not used them yet, but will do so if Ukraine does. Their use by both countries in the war has been widely documented.
Not only have the Russians used these cluster bombs extensively, but what is called the dud rate, that is the number of these that do not explode, is extraordinarily high by Western standards.
Left unexploded, those can injure civilians long after a war. Footage from earlier in the invasion shows the apparent use of cluster bombs in civilian areas attacked by Russia. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
A pioneer of artificial intelligence is concerned over his life's work. Coming up, our interview with Yoshua Bengio on the existential threats ahead and the need for tighter AI regulation. Artificial intelligence is taking the world by storm, and the race is on to regulate it. China unveiled new guidelines last week, and the European Union is in the final stages of passing its groundbreaking AI Act. The act will classify AI systems according to 4 levels of risk, from minimal to unacceptable. Riskier applications, such as for hiring or tech that's targeted to children, will face tougher requirements. And in extreme cases, violations could draw fines of up to 40 million euros, or 7% of a company's annual global revenue, which could amount to billions. Joining us now to discuss these rules is Dr. Yoshua Bengio, a professor at the University of Montreal and the founder and scientific director of MILA, the Quebec AI Institute. Dr. Bengio, thanks so much for joining us. It's a real pleasure to speak with you.
My pleasure.
Now, you were at the forefront of developing artificial intelligence technology in the 80s and the 90s, and more recently you have warned about the dangers of AI. So what are your thoughts on these new rules?
Well, we definitely need to ramp up our AI regulations over the world, including Canada and the US especially, because it's where a lot of the action is. The fact that Europe is moving first is a good thing. It's going to push things in the right direction, and it's going to be an example for other countries. So I'm glad this is happening.
But can Europe do it alone? I mean, don't AI regulations to work need to be global with key players, as you mentioned, the US, China, Canada, to have a real impact?
I mean, in democracies, we should all want to protect the public. And I understand there are also fears from industry that any kind of regulation is going to slow things, it's going to slow innovation. But we have plenty of regulations in other fields and very, very little in the field of AI. If you eat a sandwich or you drive your car or you take a plane, lots and lots of regulations exist to protect you. We should have at least kind of comparable levels for something that is impacting society a lot these days and a lot more in the future.
I want to reference the one-sentence statement you and the top leaders in your field signed, several top leaders a couple weeks ago, with another dire warning about the power of AI, which you alluded to. And I'm going to read it for our viewers. Mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. And on that note, I mean, 55 years ago, world leaders got together to sign that landmark treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Is that the kind of effort that this is going to take?
Yes. The idea is fairly simple. We are building more and more powerful tools, and AI is probably the most powerful. Something powerful could be extremely useful and also extremely dangerous. Just like nuclear energy can be very useful and nuclear weapons could be very dangerous. And so we need to sit down at the table with all the countries, and especially the ones with the ability to build those tools, to agree on how to do it in a way that's going to be safe and protect and work for all of humanity. And we've done it in other cases like biological weapons and nuclear weapons. I think there's no reason why we couldn't do it here, but it's going to take some effort. And one thing that concerns me is the technology is moving fast, so we need to ramp up our efforts.
Is it the rise of machines that we're talking about? Are we talking about Terminator here? What are we seeing, or what are you thinking is going to happen?
No, Terminator is not a good analogy to consider. First of all, these systems are actually not very good in controlling a body like in a robot. The progress in robotics has not been nearly as fast. Maybe one of the reasons is we don't have as much data that's as kind of useful to carry meaning that we have with language. We don't have as big data sets for building these robotic systems yet. But the recipe we have discovered to build these AI systems could eventually be applied there. The thing is, even without an actual body, these AI systems could be damaging. Humans could bad actors could use them in catastrophic ways, just like weapons have been. And there are people who have real concerns about these systems getting their own goals. And in that sense, you can think of Terminator, but any AI of science fiction typically has their own goal. What I think is that we should maybe, until we know better, avoid building very, very powerful and general systems that have their own goals.
Dr. Yoshua Bengio, thank you so much for your insight and your time and sharing your expertise with us. It's a real pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks for having me.
Remembering the darling of French style and cinema. Ahead, the world says goodbye to Jane Birkin. A small apartment building believed to be about 200 years old has collapsed near Naples, Italy. 3 people were pulled out of the rubble and taken to hospital for fractures. 2 passers-by received minor injuries from flying debris, but thankfully no deaths have been reported, and everyone has been accounted for. The cause of the collapse is now under investigation. British actress, singer, and style icon Jane Birkin, who became a beloved figure in France, has died at the age of 76. Birkin was known for her personal and artistic relationship with French songwriter Serge Gainsbourg, gaining international fame with their duet, Je t'aime, moi non plus. She also is the inspiration behind Hermès's famous Birkin bag. Birkin reportedly suffered from health issues in recent years, including a mild stroke in 2021. Next, looking ahead to the Women's World Cup this week. Could this be Canada's year? The Canadian women's soccer team is just days away from embarking on what it hopes will be a championship run of its own. The Women's World Cup is set to kick off on Thursday, with Canada among top contenders to bring home the coveted trophy. But as Mike Drolet reports, the team is going into the tournament with a point to prove, both on and off the field.
It's easy to get distracted at the World Cup. There's always something to see or do. So where's the Canadian women? They're trying to focus on their first match against Nigeria this Thursday.
The reality is there's 6 to 8 teams probably in the world that can win this thing, and we're definitely one of those.
When it comes to the actual game, Christine St. Clair, who's playing in her 6th World Cup, gets a lot of attention. Nobody, man or woman, has scored more international goals than her, many before some of her new teammates were born.
So listen, this might come as a bit of a shock to you, but you're going to the World Cup.
18-year-old Olivia Smith was shocked to get the news she made the team.
You ain't expecting that, eh?
And no matter how good you are, and Simi Awujo, for one, is very good, the first World Cup is always special.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited. There's also like that nervous piece just because like I'm usually the one sitting and watching it on TV, but like now it's like I'm going to be the one being watched on TV, so.
But while the focus should be on the pitch, a third of the teams at the World Cup still don't have payment agreements in place with their players. And that includes Canada, which has been without a labor deal since 2021. FIFA has guaranteed at least $30,000 US for every player. But critics don't trust that that money will ever reach them.
There's been a lot of historical issues around payment of players, whether it happens at all or whether it happens on time.
As far as the Canadian team goes, they're hoping at least a short-term deal will eliminate any distractions before their first match.
You get these opportunities, you know, once every 4 years, and I can see it in their eyes that they're grabbing this with both hands. So I hope and I know on both parties that'll be resolved soon.
And the focus can then switch from financials to where it's supposed to be, the pitch. Mike Drollet, Global News.
And that's Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Farah Nasser. On behalf of our whole crew here, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your Sunday evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is Fisherman's Wharf in Victoria. We love seeing your Canada, so please keep emailing us your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.